And we are live. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour Live. I'm Tim Montague, and today is the 8th of February, 2023. We're going to be geeking out on the resi, solar, and storage markets in California, doing a deep dive with my guest co-host, Julia Pyper, who is Vice President of Public Affairs for GoodLeap, a finance company. Welcome to the show, Julia.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. Nice to join you.
It's great to have you. And we solar professionals, we've heard the news that NEM 3 is is coming into effect now in California. And I was reading a little bit about this in preparation for today's show, and it's pretty gloomy at face value. I think it's reducing the value of solar energy that goes back on the grid by something like 75%. Am I right?
Yeah, if you look at purely what a customer is credited for their excess solar power from a rooftop project in California, that export credit is indeed going to decline 75 to 80% under the net metering 3.0 world. And so we come at this as GoodLeap as financiers in the residential space. We're actually right now the number one financier. We do loan products and we help customers if they want to bundle their residential solar loan with, say, another home improvement upgrade like a heat pump. So that's kind of great. You can have your clean energy and power your appliances with clean energy too. And so we tracked this NEM 3 proceeding really closely. We worked a lot with CALSA, the California Solar and Storage Association. They did a lot of great advocacy, as well as SIA, the national trade group. And I think one thing to keep in mind with all of this is that we knew a change to net metering was coming in California. It should not have come entirely as a surprise to anybody. This proceeding itself has been in the works for a long time. Also, it had another 1 year delay, and we should credit Governor Newsom for stepping in and saying the initial proposal, if we all remember back in December, I guess, 2021, that initial proposal from the CPUC was much, much worse than where we landed most recently. It would have a $60 per month just fee, unavoidable fixed fee for every solar customer, residential rooftop solar customer, in addition to affecting existing solar customers in the state. So a retroactive change, which we think is really a violation of the expected terms a customer has for going solar. And then also that decline in that net metering credit. And so when you think about where we landed, we no longer have retroactive changes. We do not have that grid access fee, but we do have a decline in the net metering rate. So not a win all around, but I think there's some cause for optimism, which we can also get into in a moment.
Yeah, I think of the California market as, one of the earliest adopting markets, of course. You got incentives in California, I think, as early as 2008. And until Texas recently passed California, I think last year in installs, California was by far and away the largest solar market in the U.S. And now with markets like Texas coming on, it has competition. But and then in 2018, you got legislation that required new residential construction have solar or be solar ready. I'm not sure how that plays out. I would love to hear your comments about that program, so to speak. And then um, what do you foresee with the near and medium term with the California solar market? You were saying in the pre-show that, yeah, this may be a blip on the screen because solar is going mainstream in California. People know what it is. They want resiliency, which means solar and battery or solar and generator. And they have good cause to need that and want that, right? With all the rolling blackouts and just blackouts because of wind and
Yeah.
fire. So, but
Yeah.
tell us about that law, because where California goes, the rest of the country follows typically,
Yeah.
and so that requiring solar on new facilities is very interesting, and it's coming to the commercial market as well, I understand.
Yeah, so you're referring there to California's rooftop solar mandate that was passed and approved. Before joining GoodLeap, was a reporter for Green Tech Media and some other news outlets, and did this really deep dive on that mandate a few years ago. And there's a lot of different elements to it, but for sure, requiring all new construction, new builds to have rooftop solar will be a market driver in the state of California, expanding that to commercial as well. It's a little bit of a different market. You're going to see, home builders play a more active role. They might be smaller projects. They'll kind of be wrapped into the home from the outset, but still a major driver of clean energy in the state. The vast opportunity still does exist with that existing home market, the retrofit market, as we say. What's interesting, and we have to give a shout out to Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor Schwarzenegger, who helped launch the California Solar Initiative many years ago. He helped get the state to 1 million rooftop solar projects. He's actually the supporter, his institute is the supporter of the podcast I've been working on the last 5 years, Political Climate. So have to give hat tip for his institute and for him and all the work he did in creating California's rooftop solar market. And I do not think that leadership position is going away. I think we just passed 2 million rooftops in a fraction of the time in the state. So there's still good, tailwinds there. But of course, there's complexity. It's not always sunny and it's not always grim. What we have to do as an industry now is adapt. We are moving to a world in which a resource on the grid is going to be evaluated based on the value it provides to the grid. So that is what California created. There's this whole complicated thing called the avoided cost calculator that is underpinning the value of a credit a customer gets back for that excess solar they put on the grid. And that avoided cost calculator brings in everything from natural gas prices to where resources are located to try and give a real value to what is that electron worth. We think there's a lot of work to be done on making sure the avoided cost calculator and that kind of analysis is correct. But nonetheless, it's kind of, intellectually sound to move to a world in which a resource has to play a role on the grid. And that's where we think battery storage is going to be great to go along with these rooftop solar projects. We're hearing from a lot of our installer partners at GoodLeap that they are ramping up their battery sales, training their workforce on how to sell with batteries. And that is one thing when you move to this world of less compensation for exports, is that batteries become even more valuable to the homeowner as well as the grid. So I'm excited for what that could unlock. I think we all know about the duck curve in California, where we have a lot of solar in the middle of the day, not just from rooftop, but from other large scale resources as well, and then that peak at night. So moving to a world where we can balance that in a smart way and even bring in those heat pumps, bring in our EV chargers, bring in our electric hot water heaters, and really utilize all these resources in an effective way to serve both customers and the grid, that could be really exciting. And so I hope that regulators and policymakers in California embrace that opportunity. I don't think we've got quite there yet to leveraging just all that distributed energy can offer the state. So it's kind of like we're evolving, and I think there's a lot more work to do.
So if you're a consumer in California and wanting to go solar moving forward, how does that look? How does a residential solar project pencil? What is the payback period under an M3?
So the official line on that is 9 years. That is what the regulators actually solved for. They said, we are going to say that 9 years is a fair return on investment, and that's what we're going to calculate everything to. And we could debate a lot about whether that's fair. It's sort of mandating what the market is going to have to perform to. And if you said, well, hey, if we're more efficient, shouldn't we be able to have a lower return on investment? And I guess you could argue that the flexibility is still there for companies to figure out how to get customers an even lower ROI. But in theory, we're all angling around a 9-year return on investment. And that's up from, say, 5 or 6 years in California today. So it will take you longer, in theory, to have your system pay off. But that depends on, again, if you're having a battery installed along as well, where you can really leverage the times of day when there is a lot of value for the extra electrons you put on the grid, or for when you use it on your own territory. Or on your own premise, I should say. So it really is kind of a more mixed bag. And I hope that really it's a call for the solar sales community to get educated on this. This is our opportunity to show the real value of solar beyond just the bill savings. It's participating in a resilient grid. It's offering, grid benefits at the same time as getting customer returns on that investment. So I think we're going to have a little more complicated conversations, but the value is absolutely there. And then let me just add, because you alluded to this earlier in the pre-show, that there's a chart that shows where residential solar was in California in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2022 and 2023, you can see that it pops up. We actually saw a ton of more volume last year in California, and we expect that to continue this year as is a rush to get customers in under the NEM 2 rates before they change. And then you may hear headlines that, under NEM 3, the market's going to drop 40%. But again, keep in mind, drop 40% from a peak that we're just experiencing right now. There's been almost a doubling in the state. So if it drops 40%, we're still looking at the awesome year that was 2021 or 2020. So when you put that in perspective, I don't think the California solar market, residential solar market, or rooftop solar market, because this affects commercial too, I don't think it's entirely going away. I don't think it's going away at all, I should say, but it will become a more sophisticated market, and the professionals are going to have to learn how to sell in that space.
Well, it seems like a no-brainer that it would drive residential storage. And there's a story in Energy Storage News last week by Andy Colthorpe. I'll put a link in the show notes. We're not anti-solar. California's controversial NEM 3.0 welcomed by residential ESS providers. And that story references companies like Sonnen and Franklin. And, frankly, if you make electronics, you make batteries these days. So there's well over 50 companies that make batteries for the resi market. Of course, there's a handful that are, getting traction and very popular, so to speak. I just went to a Solar Edge training. They've got something called Solar Edge Home now, which is integrating solar battery and EV charging. I noted a couple weeks ago that Hyundai now has a Hyundai Home offering. Same thing, solar battery, EV charger. It certainly is the home of the future. And California already has, I think, an attachment rate of storage to residential solar, something like 20 to 25%, right?
It's actually more like 12%. So
Okay.
that was the last public data I found from Wood Mackenzie. I can say in GoodLeap's portfolio, we've seen it get up to 20% for various quarters. But when you look at an annual review, and maybe there's new data that you're pointing to, so I'm happy to
Yeah,
be
no, this
corrected.
story
But
just says, I think it was in Q3, that
okay,
it was
yeah,
around
single quarter.
161 megawatts out of 517 of solar. So about
Well, even if it's
25%.
20 or 25%, I think that to me is one of the risks I see on the landscape is can the battery storage sector ramp up in time to meet, I think, what's going to be growing demand for batteries in this new NEM 3 environment. And I think what's so great about all the companies you just mentioned is they're coming out with some really great energy storage solutions with software packages that really optimize the battery performance. What we need to make sure of is that there's the literal supply because there's already been a backlog. I think folks have heard about even how the EV sector is having trouble getting batteries. And so I think that keeps some CEOs in the solar space I talk to up at night is can they secure that actual supply? And that was communicated to regulators, I should say, as we worked through the NEM 3 process that we all want to move to a battery world, but we do need some time to get to that world because ramping up even from 20-25% to 100% storage market is going to take a massive scaling and change of business models in the way that folks talk about the solar value. So I hope that we can get there. And I also hope that this decline in the export rate is not too painful. I think there is going to be an adjustment here. So we kind of win some and lose some and the outlook ahead. But if that battery storage market can step in, that'll be a major win.
Well, I see no alternative, for consumers. I mean, a 9-year payback is not horrible. It could be 15. And if you have resiliency, though, your solar array is worth so much more. And being able to ride out a storm, an outage for whatever reason, whether that's wind or fire or flood, is an amazing thing, right? And then the value shoots way up because you know living in the dark is just no fun, and so our lives really
Right.
run on electricity now, and everybody wants that. So um,
Well, the
I
challenge, if I can say though, is that does everyone place the same value on that? It depends on where you live. How reliable is your grid? Will you pay X amount to have that resilience on the 1 week where you really, really, really need it when, say, 90% of the time you don't? And that's not to say there isn't value for when it's not a critical event. That's where I think those energy storage companies you mentioned will come up with some really great solutions in partnership with the solar industry to maximize the way your system runs in the background so that you're leveraging on peak hours and off peak hours. But it is a very complicated world to figure that out. There are something like almost 600 values in terms of where you live, time of day of week, month of year to figure out on the back end how to optimize the rates that a customer will get. But if the companies can figure that out, then you can sell both on the resilience element of distributed energy, and on sort of these rate arbitrage opportunities and opportunities to serve the grid and actually sort of get compensated for it in a way.
Yeah, and you mentioned supply chain. Um, you know, e- Everybody learned how to say that in their sleep last year. It was a major headache for the solar industry. It really put a damper on the solar industry. We didn't have a great year because of supply chain issues. But I will say that I've had numerous storage guests on the show recently. Check out Paul Charles, for example, American Battery Factory. They're propping up a lithium iron phosphate production facility in Tucson, Arizona. I had Mukesh Chatter, CEO of Alsam Energy. They're doing an alternative lithium ion battery. I don't quite understand their technology, but anyway, it's also lithium ion, and then many alternatives, mostly zinc related. Uh, so so these guys in the lithium industry are quite optimistic that they're going to figure out the supply chain challenges. Lithium is super abundant, and yeah, we need to crank up more lithium mines and more mines in North America for sure, because it is a national security issue that all of that is the vast majority of it is happening elsewhere, and a vast majority of the cell manufacturing is happening in China, which is a real problem if we ever have a conflict with China and they decide to cut off the tap. But so there is a massive amount of onshoring happening. I guess, this brings to mind the IRA. And that was a major piece of legislation last year. And, we've seen like this amazing um, flood of announcements of major battery EV manufacturing and solar panel manufacturing because of the IRA. uh, what are your thoughts about supply chain more than what you've said so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited about this. I think this is a new era for US manufacturing. We talk about World War II to sort of go back in history, where United States was not the first to get in the game, but when it got in, it put, a lot into it and was successful. And I kind of feel like this is happening now. If people may remember the arsenal of democracy back in the day when the United States got involved in fighting back fascism in Europe, we have the opportunity for an arsenal of clean energy right now, where this becomes our next kind of issue where America leads. And I think it's going to have massive economic benefits and job benefits for the whole nation, and also for our allies. I think you alluded there to a national security element. That's very much true when it comes to making these critical resources that we use to power our economies. And the more we can do that here, the better. And now I think for the first time in a long time, if really ever, there are the policy pillars in place to make that happen, between not only the Inflation Reduction Act, but also the bipartisan infrastructure bill and what's called the Chips and Science Act, which is focused on semiconductors. Those three bills together, passed under the Obama administration, excuse me, Biden administration, are really going to think unlock a new era for U.S. manufacturing. There's one specific credit, for instance, the 45X credit, that's all about advanced manufacturing here in the U.S. And I know for a fact that certain battery storage companies, like the ones you're probably referencing here, may be looking to leverage that tax credit to actually make things in America again. At the same time, there are additional tax credits for the deployment of U.S. made and manufactured clean energy projects. So you both incentivize the building of the factory, and then you incentivize the deployment of the actual US made product. So that's very exciting. And I don't think there's ever been that much policy certainty. This is also a 10-year bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's kind of the horizon you need to make investments. So that's really exciting. I will say, I think there's a little bit of market disparity in some of the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. It did not fully offer domestic tax credits to all homeowners who want to purchase solar with US made products. So that's something I hope we can work to fix. I think it was just a small oversight, but we should make sure that the US consumer also gets incentivized to buy US made products and not just corporations. But apart from that, I'm very excited about the manufacturing that's going to happen here in America. On the solar side, I think the US provides only 2% of the world's solar panels today. That's to meet global demand. The Solar Energy Industries Association is hoping that we're going to get to more like 40 gigawatts of solar production, up from the 7 or so today. And that's kind of what we're looking at, with even just alluded to or already made announcements for products happening, for starting out products, whole manufacturing facilities coming to the US. So it's going to take a lot of time to get from A to B. Not every announcement we hear on manufacturing will become a real project in the real world. But I think we all saw Q Cells announce that major new investment in Georgia. And that I
Yeah.
think is going to be the tip of the spear over the next, 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah, we had Scott Moskowitz on the show last week from Q Cells, and we geeked out. They're ramping to 8.3 gigawatts per year, and 3.5 of which will be soup to nuts, right? Ingot to panel, like complete full life cycle, which is incredible because nobody does that today in the U.S. So, so kudos to Q Cells for
Massive.
bringing it
Kudos to
on.
Scott.
And
He's fantastic. I had a chance to work with him.
I found this White House page on the IRA. It's called IRA by the numbers, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But it's got some eye-popping statistics here. Um, it says 950 million solar panels, and I did some numbers. That's about 475 gigawatts of solar, 2,300 grid-scale battery plants. I mean, my goodness. I have my eyes and ears on maybe a dozen battery facilities coming to fruition, but 2,300, that's a big, big number. I'm curious, how does the IRA get paid for?
How does it get paid for? So the way that
Yeah,
they paid for it in part um, was through, gosh, I'm having to go back in my memory. Part of it was actually in part through the IRS funding. They're going to try and hire more IRS agents to try and collect taxes in a more effective manner. And that was actually listed by the budget office and Congress as one of the elements to be paid for. And I believe also some elements of the drug pricing parts of the Inflation Reduction Act are also cost saving. So you kind of get outside the clean energy world into, yeah, the pay for world. What's interesting on that front is you may hear that the Inflation Reduction Act is a $370 billion piece of legislation. It could actually end up costing more, which is exciting for our sector in the sense that the core pillars of the Inflation Reduction Act are tax credits. So when the number 370 billion gets thrown around, that's an estimate for the amount of tax credits that the Congressional Budget Office thinks is going to be used. In fact, we could see a doubling of that, which is why Credit Suisse said, no, it's actually going to be more like an $800 billion bill because those tax credits have no cap on them. It's just as many products as you can build, get that tax credit over the next 10 years. And even in some cases, it goes beyond 10 years because the threshold is that you actually have to reduce carbon emissions in order to see the tax credits phase out. I think it's reducing carbon emissions by 75% of, I think, 2005 levels, something along those lines. So if you actually have a carbon reduction metric and not just a timeline for when tax credits phase out, you could see these tax credits exist for quite a long time. And that's why I think the IRA could be much a bigger budget number. I think the question of cost is always comes down to what are the benefits as well. Those are incentives, but then they get recycled into the U.S. economy in the form of jobs, corporations, growing and profiting, individual employees making good salaries. A lot of this is union-based labor and new apprenticeship programs that will open as requirements for certain elements of the IRA tax credits. So I think it's really an investment in a whole new industry, not new industry, but an expansion of an industry that's going to deliver even greater benefits back. And so when you talk about the cost, yes, there are pay-fors. Yes, there's it's going to be an investment by the country, but I think what will be interesting to look at, and I'm sure there's someone's done this, is what is the actual net benefit that we think could come from this bill when you factor in not only the investment, but then the return on investment that the nation gets.
yeah, exactly. It's not well understood, I don't think, by the average consumer or even prosumer that when you put a dollar of incentive on the table, it generates $3 of jobs and economic growth, and so it's an accelerant, and that's certainly what we're seeing with all of the onshoring and reshoring of manufacturing. This is solar panels, batteries, and EVs. There's other stuff I'm sure coming. Heat pumps are incentivized by the IRA legislation as well, which are critical for electrifying the home. But let's talk a little more about the residential solar market. This is a market that John and I don't talk too much about on the show, And I want to really shine a light while I have an expert like yourself at my disposal. So, first of all, GoodLeap works with and for residential installers and, of course, their customers, consumers. Um, Tell us a little more about your business model and what are the trends that you're seeing in solar finance right now?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So, GoodLeap, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, is a financier of sustainable home solutions. So, that includes residential solar and batteries, but also a whole other suite of sustainable home upgrades. So, heat pumps, as you mentioned there, efficient roofing, even things like insulated garage doors that have higher efficiency ratings than the status quo product. Everything we finance has some additional sustainability benefit, has to meet a higher SEER rating or a higher quality of efficiency performance. That includes geothermal as well, EV charging. There's 25 or so products we have on the GoodLeap platform that we help finance. And we do that through our installer network. So those are our partners on the front lines of the clean energy revolution who are having those conversations with the customer. We are a financing option for them, offering a really seamless way to have those conversations so that a customer can get a loan very easily with a few taps of their fingers. And then we help serve that customer for the remainder of their loan, be it 20, 25 years, what have you. So we are the connective tissue between the big financial institutions in the world who want to get involved in clean energy, the sort of 50 trillion globally we need to deploy to solve climate change. We are helping be the conduit between those massive financial institutions and the residential market, where they're not going to get involved on a onesie twosie basis. A Credit Suisse of the world is not going to give an individual loan directly to a homeowner, but we can help be the connective tissue there and connect those financial institutions to the contractor workforce and then to the consumer. And so I think what's a big trend there is keeping this whole process seamless. Even when we talk about policies, and this is an ongoing debate now with the Department of Energy as we look at rolling out the Inflation Reduction Act provisions, specifically around heat pumps, since you mentioned that, is how do we make sure that those rebates and tax credits are easy to access? The rebates in particular under the Inflation Reduction Act, they go up to $8,000 for a heat pump, $14,000 in total for certain families, depending on their income, for a whole host of different electric and efficient home upgrades. But how they get that $14,000 is really critical. If they have to write something on a hard copy piece of paper, put it in the mail, and send it to their state energy office, that homeowner may just forget to do that. They may not get the rebate. And I know this is something that the Department of Energy is keenly aware of, and they're working on how do we make this more efficient. So that's, I think, a big trend in residential clean energy more broadly is technology solutions, software solutions like GoodLeaps. They make it so easy to get access to a rebate. They make it super easy to finance your system. Just remove those speed bumps that enable a customer to say, I'm just going to go with like the cheapest, dirtiest. I don't really care what product. I'm just going to throw in, a gas, HVAC system. It's like, no, wait, we have better products, that are better for you, will save you more money in the long run. And here's why, because you can finance it. It all takes 5 seconds. So I think that's a major breakthrough that we can't take for granted as we think about the rollout of sustainable homes. Gosh, what other trends in the sustainable home? I think that IRA is
Let's
just a
talk a
massive
little more
boon.
about that, particularly this trend of, contractors in the solar industry are very specialized historically, right? You were a solar installer. Now you're a solar and battery installer, or a solar
Mhm.
and battery and EV charger installer. And so the role of the solar installer is changing. You have to see your customer, even if they only bought a solar array initially, they are going to install a battery at some point. Today, less than a percent probably of American homes have a battery. In 10 years, a significant percent of American homes are going to have a battery. And the same with the EV charger. You want to be able to charge your EV at home. I know firsthand the importance of having a level 2 charger in my garage. And so there's going to be a massive adoption of these level 2 chargers. And why not, if you're a solar installer, do that full wraparound? Now, on the heat pump side, I don't know if solar installers will expand into that. I think some of them may. And then, of course, we'll see HVAC installers becoming other things, right? Just around electrification of the home. I don't know if you have any an opinion or crystal, ideas in your crystal ball there.
I think we're on the cusp of seeing that come to fruition, right? I think financing products like GoodLeaps actually make that easier. Because when you think about it, those are very different industries. The products are installed on different timelines. Your HVAC system can go in a matter of days. Your solar system's going to take 2 to 3 months. So, how does a contractor get paid for the work that's delivered at the right time? How do they get the products installed at the right time and pay for those and move things through their warehouse accordingly? So, it's actually not the most seamless thing to say, bundle these products together, even though from the consumer perspective, sure, yeah, I'm going to upgrade my home at the same time. And in fact, it's really valuable to the consumer to say, make sure that they've got new insulation in their house before they add an HVAC system that's going to suddenly be heating or cooling a leaky home. You might as well do your insulation first. And then when you add your solar, it's properly sized to the loads in your home. So there's a lot of potential consumer benefits to thinking about things as a package. And I think there's big upside for the contractors as well who start to sell and install more products. But we do have to start to see some cross pollination between some industries that are historically separate. So I don't know this is going to be a panacea tomorrow. I think you will, as you alluded to there, see solar companies get into storage, get into roofing companies getting into solar. I think you'll see HVAC companies getting into more things in the home, smart thermostats, thinking about controlling the devices in the home, electric water heaters. There are companies who are already thinking about this whole package, even wrapping in security systems, because it's all about what does your home need right now as you're thinking about a home upgrade. So why not leverage that one conversation? And I do think that the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and rebates help facilitate this conversation a little bit because there's so many different incentives in there for these various home upgrades that I think can help drive the conversation. But I don't want to pretend like it's going to happen tomorrow. At GoodLeap, we're trying to do the back end work of making that more seamless so that a contractor can get paid for the various products that are installed on a timeline that makes sense. So it's super seamless on the back end, and the customer just has one single loan for all of these products. That bundling concept, I think, is really going to help us unlock this new sector in new and exciting ways because it just wasn't that seamless in the past.
Well, let's talk a little more about the U.S. at large. California is an important market, but it's only a fraction of the entire U.S. What do you see in residential solar? It's very interesting that residential solar is around 5 gigawatts a year now in the US. And, you know, we have community solar being around 2 gigawatts a year and commercial industrial solar behind the meter, rooftop commercial industrial solar around 3 gigawatts a year, smaller than residential solar. What do you see nationally? And um, a second question about commercial, I guess, is somebody or is there a trend to standardize solar finance in the CNI space?
Well, I'll focus on residential because I'm not an expert on the CNI space. I think that's a harder to tackle segment in general, and I'm not an expert there. But what I can say on the residential side is we should take a moment to celebrate. We just had at least 6 consecutive quarters, and I haven't seen the latest numbers for the last quarter of 2022 yet, but I imagine it will be record setting as well. 6 consecutive quarters. Excuse me, 6 consecutive quarters of record breaking growth in the residential sector. And that is as our friends in the other sectors have had trouble amid some tariff disputes and other issues. Our supply chains have been relatively insulated from some of that with products coming from other parts of the world. They're not as affected by some trade issues and just seeing such strong customer demand. Let's remember that electricity prices are up something like 17% year over year across the country. In some specific utility districts and territories it's up 40%. Customers are looking to residential solar as a hedge against those rising electricity prices, which is really a testament to this inflationary environment we are in. Once installed, residential solar is inflation proof. You pay that single payment, especially with a loan product, because it's locked in. There's no escalator or inflation that happens over time, and you get to lock in that energy price for 25 years. So I think that's what's driving this amazing record setting growth for residential, even as there's been some sort of challenges across the market. Um, so I think that's a trend will continue, but I also think it's fine if we don't set a record for a quarter and we take a moment to catch up and catch our breath. So I'll go back to the NEM3 comment where I'll say if we see any declines as we work through backlogs or we can, adapt to NEM3, I think that's not the end of the world. It'll still be really healthy growth, which I think is good for the market to have as well. We want to make sure that customers are seeing the value and that consumer protection is front of mind. So I think that we're both going to see more records set over time, but that the residential solar industry should also congratulate itself for what's been achieved so far. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer on your C&I question.
No worries, no worries. So, when you think nationally, you know, solar is famous for being regional. It takes good legislation like a renewable portfolio standard. It
Yeah.
takes um, net metering. Good net metering rules make or break getting a solar industry off the ground. And then other incentives. Without those other incentives like renewable energy credits, the Illinois market would never have really taken off. We had an RPS of 25% since 2008, but it was broken. It was going nowhere fast and not going to achieve that goal because consumers looked at that 15 years and go, well, yeah, that's just not going to happen. I can't get excited about that. I don't know if I'm going to own my home for 10 years or business for that matter. So, how many states approximately are good residential solar states in the US today?
There's probably 20 states that are realistically in play. And then among that, there's the top 10, top seven that are really growing fast. Texas, California, Florida, massive solar states. Then you get into Arizona, Nevada, Colorado. What I'm excited about is some new potentially opening markets. We're seeing places like Arkansas where they did actually pass net metering in 2019, retail rate net metering. And business has really flourished there. GoodLeap actually opened an office in Arkansas and has over 100 employees there. So there's these lower tier, if you think just in terms of volume, states that really have the potential to drive growth and bring consumers benefits. I will actually note that we're working to protect net metering in Arkansas. I think there's a lot of great benefits to the economy there that we need to make sure that we celebrate and make lawmakers aware of to keep that market growing. But that is an example of a state that's opened up recently. There's also an effort underway in Maryland to get some new incentives in place to reboot a market in that state that's actually declined year over year, the residential solar market. So that's a prime area to start fixing some of the elements of what was part of the renewable portfolio plan several years ago that have actually left residential out. So we're going to sort of fix that, step in with a policy change that will reboot that market, hopefully, if our bill passes. And that could be a really exciting new opportunity for
What
the
market
market
is
there
that
as
you're
well.
referring to?
That's Maryland. So
Maryland.
if you
Ah,
look back at 2016, 2017, I think there were something like 20,000 projects being installed a year. And now we're down to something on the order of 4,000 projects being installed in Maryland a year. And that has to do with the SREC market and compensation for residential, which
mm,
is quite low. So there's an effort underway to sort of fix that with a solar grant that would reboot the market for a short period of time, bring some installers back. There's a lot of economies and scale and cost savings that come with just rebooting a market and getting efficiencies of scale happening again. So that's really the hope for Maryland. So those are just two examples for you, but I think there's opportunities on the horizon to see more of these states that are maybe not in the top seven today to become really healthy and strong residential solar markets and in the months and years to come.
yeah, it's quite fascinating to me to see how much activity there is in Florida and Texas. Um, Florida, not a great rooftop solar market historically. Lots of utility scale solar driven by FPL, Florida Power and Light, and them pushing back constantly on consumer friendly legislation that makes behind the meter solar more accessible to residents and business owners. What is driving activity in the Florida market per se when it comes to residential solar?
I think the rising electricity rate story is a big part of it. There was a local utility that was acquired in the Panhandle area, and those customers, they're some of the folks who saw their electricity prices increase exponentially in the past year. So they're like, "Whoa, I would like to control my costs against this." Florida is subject to imported a lot. It has to import a lot of its natural gas, and so it's really subject to volatile price changes in that market, which I think causes some of these electricity spikes. So it's just a supply and demand thing in Florida. I don't think it's about anyone necessarily looking to go green. It's just consumers looking at their pocketbooks and saying, hey, I have this resource, the sun, a whole lot of it here, and I can find a way to lock in my energy costs or mitigate the increases with this product. And that's what's driving a lot of the growth. And we have to know that Governor DeSantis stepped in and vetoed an anti-net metering bill last year. So he put in his veto memo that this was something to be done on behalf of consumers who deserve not to have prices increase in an inflationary environment, just keep the option of going solar on the table without putting these onerous potential of fees and eliminating the net metering credit. So he is one of the most pro solar governors if you simply look at his record on this front. And there's more that went into that decision. But I think we should just acknowledge that in Florida and other states, it's just becoming business now, big business solar. It's becoming interwoven in communities. And so that's a nice new milestone, I think, to have hit as an industry.
Agreed. Yeah, that was interesting that DeSantis protected the solar industry that way, and I was glad he did. Um, I get a lot of inquiries from installers in Florida and Texas. They're big states. Florida is the fastest growing state in the U.S. right now, which is fascinating. I mean, I get it that people want to live someplace warm. I'm afraid of
Also, a
climate
big heat
change.
pump state.
It's a heat pump state.
Yeah, lots of heat pumps already
Mm,
there.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you can go solar and power your heat pump.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Um,
But sorry to
well, what else
interrupt
is
you.
on
So
your
you get
mind that we
inquiries.
should talk about? What's newsworthy in your in your world? I can geek out on things like corn to ethanol and how inefficient that is, but I'd love to get more of your perspective there in California and a GoodLeap.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, one thing that just comes to mind is sort of taking a step back, I think is just a fun milestone to think about. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, last year, clean energy investments topped $1 trillion. That was the first time that clean energy investments topped $1 trillion. And it's actually the first time that clean energy investments matched fossil fuel investments. So if we just take a step back as a sector and think about that achievement, that is great. I mean, it's a milestone we should not take lightly. It's taken a long time to build the business models, to build the investor confidence, to say this is a legitimate industry, it's worth putting trillions into. And so I think we've kind of unlocked a new era on that front. So I thought that was a fun end of 2022 stat to think about, sort of where clean energy investment is today.
Yeah, that $1 trillion mark was really cool, I have to say, and I mean, there's a bigger picture here, and that is that the clean energy transition represents $100 trillion opportunity. $100 trillion of infrastructure and economic growth, and this is the wealth transfer opportunity of many people's lifetimes. If you get into electrification of everything and renewable energy, you've got a 30-year run now, right? We're going to do this, and it's going to take 20 to 30 years, hopefully less, but realistically, this is a 20 to 30-year trip that we're embarking on, and it's pure growth, and it's very good for young people, young professionals, career changers. I always say, if you're not in clean energy or clean tech, please reach out to me. Love to hear from our listeners and help people network their way into solar storage and electrification of everything. Um,
Yeah. I mean, just to build off that for a second, we're speaking shortly after President Biden, the next day after his State of the Union address. And anyone who is watching heard him say, we're going to have fossil fuels for a while. They are going to be a while. And he made some points about domestic production and needing to ramp that up. He also made some points about going after windfalls for the oil and gas companies and ensuring that that they are paying their fair share. But one of the comments he mentioned along the way as he made this spiel was, we're going to have oil for at least the next 10 years, to which a lot of, I think, Republicans laughed. And honestly, some, I think, progressives were disappointed and booed because they would love to see us shift away from fossil fuels faster. So that to me was just a poignant moment in his address where we're sort of calling out, what is that future of oil going to be, and oil specifically. So I put that on my Twitter feed and just put it out to an informal poll, and I'll share it with you for fun. I said, maybe not how long will be around full stop, but how long do you think it'll be central to our energy system? And today, oil is one of the largest sources of primary sources of energy. It's around a third of energy use globally. So if we say it's no longer central, let's say it's 10% or less of the global energy system. So I sort of asked folks, how long until you think we get there? And over 450 people responded to this informal Twitter poll. And most people, 42%, thought in 20 years oil would no longer be central. And 31% of folks thought that in 50 years it would no longer be central. But about an equal number of people, 13% each, thought it could be 100 years or even forever that we'll have oil really be a central part of our global energy system. So that's going to be a fascinating real world discussion to have over time. Has a lot to do with the transportation market, obviously, but also plastics and other products that oil is a part of. And so while we're seeing clean energy investments now start to match fossil fuels globally, we should just remember how central those fossil fuels are to our global economy. And it's going to take a lot of work to transition away from them. But also, the last thing I'll say on this is the discussion of how long products like oil stay central to our energy system will itself affect how long they stay central to the energy system, because the perception of whether that's a good return on investment will drive in part where investors want to put their money or not. They may view, okay, if oil's going away, I don't want to be the one caught holding the bill for that investment that's a stranded asset at some point. So I think this is a fascinating topic to watch. The president teed it up in a State of the Union last night, and I'd love to know what your listeners think if you open this up for discussion too, of how long they think oil will be around for and central to our system.
Yeah, and I published an article this week on the Clean Power Hour. The title is "Poison Pill for the IRA: Old White Men Are Ruining the Future for Young People." It's an article that my dad wrote about the 45Q incentives in the IRA legislation, incentivizing carbon capture and enhanced oil recovery. It's really the enhanced oil recovery that is the poison pill here, because what it does is it creates an economy for captured CO2 to then be pumped into the ground to enhance oil recovery. Most companies walk away from an oil well when there's 50 to 60% of the oil still left in the ground. And now they're going to capture CO2 from smokestacks, pipe it all over the US. 66,000 miles of pipelines are planned, and then put it down in the ground to bring more oil out of the ground. And all the while claim that, oh, well, we're capturing carbon, so we're being green and doing our part. And the real kicker is that they get to watchdog themselves in all of this. There is no third party watchdog and accounting of all of these numbers. So anyway, it is truly a poison pill, and we have to be very careful. It's one thing to add a bunch of solar and batteries to the grid, which is a very good thing. And I'm a solar developer myself, and I'm doing this every day. And I feel very good about this, right? It's creating clean jobs. It's helping people reduce their power bill, and it's greening the grid, reducing air pollution, which kills 6 to 7 million people a year globally.
Mm.
Air pollution from fossil fuels is a major health hazard to humanity. And one way or another, we are going to make the transition. Just a question of how quick. I hope you're right. I hope your poll is true and it's 20 years and not 50 years. But those forces are big, right? And money talks in politics. It's no accident that 45Q found its way into the IRA legislation. I'm sure Joe Manchin has his fingers all over that. And I don't know if you want to say anything else about the
Yeah.
oil industry and IRA, but it's it's a double edge.
Yeah, I think if you look at scientific research from the UN and other places, we will need carbon capture. It does not say for enhanced oil recovery, however. So I'm in the camp of I would love to be able to develop this technology. It is just a shame that it's being used to then just produce more fossil fuels. So I think it's a helpful tax credit to try and stimulate a market and get that technology growing, because it is very expensive. But we do know we will need to remove some carbon from our atmosphere if we are going to keep a habitable planet. That's been established by the scientists. So, how we get there as an industry, I think it's going to be challenging. So, I'm not sure if down the line we could see some policy changes that would maybe limit enhanced oil recovery as a use for carbon capture and sequestration. But that would be nice to see, so we could get the benefits of the technology without just putting more fossil fuels into the economy. The one other topic this draws to mind that I'll maybe leave you with as we round out the show here is the use of critical minerals and products that have to be brought out of the ground for both clean energy and the fossil fuel industry. I more and more see this debate around, oh, clean energy is also extractive. And that is true. Like, we should be mindful of the cobalt, of the lithium, of various other products that go into batteries, that go into much less, but in part solar panels, and the steel and aluminum and things like that. I do want to note, though, you can look to several reports from the World Bank, from the International Energy Agency, and others, that the portion of extracted products in order to meet our net zero goals is still a fraction of our current baseline use of fossil fuels. Every single, ton of coal has to be brought out of the earth, and if you look at images of that, it's not a very pleasant process, and it's not necessarily good for the workers themselves. Same with oil, same with gas. So if you just are concerned about the sheer, removal of products from our natural environment, the fossil fuel industry and that whole sector is by far more extractive, also because that product cannot be reused. Yes, you can use carbon capture and perhaps do something else with a portion of the product, but you can't just burn it again. So it's not recyclable. Whereas at least on the clean energy front, you can at least reuse many of those products. And now I'm not going to say that those supply chains are fully set up for recycling. We have a lot more work to do, but there's at least the potential to reuse the nickel, reuse the cobalt, reuse other parts of our technologies on the clean energy front. So if we're looking at a chart, which I tweeted out recently, and David Roberts at Canary Media did a great piece on this, it just goes to show how small the use of these products is in the clean energy net zero environment versus our business as usual on the fossil fuel side. So we do need to discuss human rights in extractive industries, particularly globally and in Africa. We do need to talk about making sure it's not done in an environmentally degrading way. We need to talk about, tribes and their rights to natural lands, and everything like that when it comes to any mining activity for whatever product we're talking about. I don't want to pretend like those are easy discussions, but if we're just concerned about the portion of product we have to pull out of the ground, our clean energy future is a brighter way to look at that. And I think we should celebrate that and talk about it and get the data involved in these debates, because I see that become more and more of a thing. It's not on par when you talk about extraction across the resources.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, I want to thank you, Julia Pyper, for coming on the show today as my co-host. And you are the Vice President of Public Affairs for GoodLeap, as well as the host of Political Climate, a podcast. Thank you so much for being here. How can our listeners find you, Julia?
Yeah, look me up on LinkedIn. Just Julia Pyper, Pyper. You mentioned the podcast Political Climate. It's the last couple days of voting in the Cleany Awards. We were actually up for a podcast award, and it's People's Choice. So if you go to the Cleany Awards, you can check it out on my LinkedIn or Twitter or elsewhere. We'd love your votes. You can vote 5 times in a row, wait 5 minutes, and even vote 5 times again. We'd love that. I mentioned Twitter. I'm also at JMPYPER. Feel free to reach out to me there in a direct message, or just tweet at me. I'd love to have a conversation and tell me what all I got wrong in this discussion. Always open to learning.
Excellent. Well, you can find all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Please give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify to help others find this content, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I want to thank you, Julia Pyper, for coming on the show. Let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague.
Thanks so much for having me.